lease, and you're going to really regret the fact that you weren't represented. So do both of us a favor and make sure that you let them know if you're going to make that call. But best of the best would be you just give me a call and I'll make it happen. You're never bothering me. And if I'm not there right away, it's okay. It's okay, because I know you're eager, I know you're in a hurry, but the best thing I could do is run the history on this and make sure that, you know, we're looking at a property that's going to suit all the needs that you told me from the get-go. And chances are, if you found it on Zillow, I've seen it too, and it didn't fit the criteria. If you'd like me to widen, that's right. So just be straight from the get-go. And if you find that they're doing that, you should have a buyer's rep in place, because then at least you have something. Not that you're going to go fight for your commission every time a leasee goes and gets a lease without you, because it's going to happen. But and sometimes it's not even worth it to fight for. I mean, I'm not going to say don't fight for your commission, but ultimately it's your reputation, and also your Zillow review or your Yelp review. And so sometimes it's not even worth it. So if you have that conversation up front and you've had the buyer rep sign and they still go ahead and do it, just take them out of your database.
Right. But yeah, and I think if I just educate them exactly the way you said, that's what I needed.
Perfect. Perfect. So this is the seller's authorization to exclude the listing from the multiple listing service. So real quick, if we can go back to that listing date. So again, like I said, if I went to list with them today, I would want them to sign this as if it's today, but then I would exclude it from the MLS for however long they want. So at least that way I have a active listing agreement. And then this will state when it will go into the MLS. So it says down here that the seller's authorization to exclude property from MLS states, 1, that the broker shall not submit the property to the MLS until this date, or that the broker shall not submit the property to the MLS at all. Sorry for those online, I'm like coughing in their ears. One really important thing, though, that I want you guys to know is that by introducing this to your seller or the landlord, they are at risk for fair housing violation if you show the property or allow some people to see the house and not others to see the house before it actually is active on the MLS. So you'll want to explain that to them and be very clear. You guys don't have a copy of this? No, this is in seller's representation, but I wanted to show you can use that for this as well. If you're going to list today and then delay the activity on the MLS, like listing it active on MLS. But just be sure that you understand that there are risks to this as well, and there's nothing wrong with having this start the date that they want the lease listing to start. It's okay. But if you choose to go in and get it listed actively today, but they don't want to put it on the MLS for a month, then you need to use this form. And I'll show you as we move along. It's a couple paragraphs down. I'll show you where you would fill out this to match that. Does that make sense? Okay. Kind of? You're like, maybe?
What's the name of this again? I'm sorry.
Sure. This is the seller's authorization to exclude listing from the multiple listing service. Okay, so I'm going to go back here and open all these so you guys can see where I'm at. All right, so the next page, broker's compensation. When earned and payable, landlord will pay broker what? And so you have 1, 2, or 3. The first, you have to check 1, or you could check 1 and 3 depending on what 3 is. It might be a bonus structure or something. So percentage of 1 full month's rent to be paid under the lease of a property. That is, now remember, as we move down here, it says that you're going to pay the cooperating broker or the lease agent, right? So if you have the tenant, you're going to pay them a commission. So whatever you're asking for, you want to make sure it's enough to pay you and for them, just like you would on a listing agreement.
Okay, so that is the full amount up here, but then down in D, that's when you break that out. Right?
Correct. Correct. So for instance, I see a lot, I mean, it's really hard to talk commission, but for instance, if you say you're going to list, you want 100% or 80% or 75%, whatever that looks like, if you want a percentage of 1 month's rent, okay, then that would go in number 1. If you say, I want a percentage of 1 month's rent plus $100 bonus, or if I list it within so many days or whatever, or if they're going to pay you a flat fee, then that would be in number 3. And then number 2 is a percentage of all rents to be paid under the lease property. That's very typical of a commercial lease. So like typically when you have somebody that's like renting a hair salon and they would pay you a percentage of their entire rental agreement. It's very rare to see that in residential, but if you do, great, that's number 2. Okay? Talks about earned and payable. Basically, when you do your job based on what it's set here, it's earned and payable to you. D, other compensation. This talks about if you wanted other compensation here in D. It talks about if you would want, whoops, I can't highlight it, I guess. So if you would want to charge them if like the current leasee renews their lease. Now, if they're using a property management company, typically the property management company handles this. So chances are you're not going to use this section. But if you're the person that's leasing all the time and they want you for some reason to help them rewrite the lease or the lease renewal, then you can put that in here ahead of time. So they're agreeing ahead of time that they will pay you if you help them with the lease renewal. Chances are you guys aren't going to do that. But if you do, let me know and we'll go deeper into that. Okay? But most of the time, either the landlord handles that or a property management company handles that. Compensation for sale, it says if landlord agrees to sell the property, okay, the landlord will then pay the broker what? And so that's where you'll ask for a sales commission. And you'll want that filled out because if they can't find a tenant in an appropriate amount of time or they're just unhappy with the process, they may decide to sell. And if you don't have it in there, then you might be out of luck on commission. So make sure that's there.
Typically the same, 3%?
It's negotiable. Negotiable, and you're still going to have to pay a buyer's agent. So you'd put,
6%.
yeah, it's negotiable. Yes.
Back on the broker compensation.
Yes, ma'am.
So if you're taking the lease,
Mm-hmm.
how do you account for the buyer-tenant compensation?
Sure, we're about to get into that. It's a little bit further down into this, but
Oh, okay.
it's just like on a lease listing, you're going to tell them what you'll pay the other side.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wondered where that.
Yes. Yeah, it's down.
25, whatever that percent is.
Yes. I mean, ultimately, you get to decide that as the listing agent and put it in here unless the landlord says, I'm going to pay you this, but you need to pay them that. Then that's negotiable.
Okay.
So we will definitely get to that here. It talks about service providers. Obviously, broker may receive a fee for a referral if you're going to refer them a mover or something. Again, you need to disclose what that is if that's the case. I always say disclosure is better. Like if you're going to refer a mover and the mover pays you $50 for every referral, you need to disclose that. Okay?
Do you put in the amount?
I do. Like I just disclose it.
Yes.
I mean, now I've never taken, I don't have people that are like, hey, the only person that I do is ADT. If you guys have gotten those calls, ADT will call you and say, hey, we'll give you $200 if you give us your client's information. And what I say to ADT is, that's awesome. Here's what I'll do. I'll let my client know that you're offering a deal. You can give that $200 to them and they will call you because I don't sell my client's information. So just depends, but yeah, I would disclose if you do. It's not bad or good, it's just whatever you choose to do. Other fees, so that's any application fee or administrative fee paid to the broker is retained by the broker. Again, most of those fees should be going to whoever is running the qualification process, right? And really, honestly, y'all, it's in your best interest to not do it. So I'm just going to tell you not to do it. If you choose to do it, then let's have a conversation about what that looks like, okay? If you're going to run the qualification process, because this is talking about like application fees. Like if you're running the application through background check and all that, then you would typically accept the background fee and then it's obtained by the broker. That's what this is saying. And then reimbursable expenses, that's really there if, let's say they terminate this and you bought pictures and you've staged their property or whatever, then you can say in the event that this terminates, I will expect that you pay me back for my photos or whatever. Again, it's very rare to fight for that because they're just going to go on Yelp and slam you anyway. So it's a give and take there. What I don't want to see is transaction fees though. You can't charge transaction fees. So it used to be that people would charge transaction fees and a commission, but your commission really should cover everything that you're doing. Okay? Any questions on that? Okay. Next page is the protection period, just like in a listing agreement. That's the amount of days that you're protected. For instance, if they say, hey tenant, why don't you fire your realtor, I'll fire my realtor, I'll give you a deal on the rent or whatever, then you're protected if the property was shown while you were the agent. Unless they terminate with you and sign with another agent, then you don't have a protection period anymore because they've...
What's kind of a typical time?
I mean, honestly, less than a month, 10 days is okay. I mean, it's very rare that they're going to take a month to do whatever that is. So, and if they're firing you to hire someone else, it doesn't matter because that kind of trumps this. So, okay. So yeah, I think I was trained to like do 60 to 90 days. That's silly. If they're going to do it, they're going to do it within a couple weeks of firing me. And then it says F is where the money gets paid. If there is any money that changes hands, like your commission, that would be paid in Williamson County. That's where your broker is. So listing services, so this is where if you were to list it now but delay listing actively, this is where that would be put, because it says A, landlord instructs the broker as follows. 1, the broker will file this listing with 1 or more MLSs, and you have A, within the 5 days after this is executed. Or 2, it says not to list until so many days after this date begins for what purposes. And it could be like tenant move out or property cleanup or photography, whatever. Okay, so you would check. If you check B or number 2, it says the broker will not file this listing with the MLS. If you check A1B, I'm going to say this again. If you check 6A1B, or 6A2, then you will need to use the exclude the listing form, okay? Because then that way they also understand, okay, that's fine, I can exclude this, and you understand the risks involved, so that means we probably will not show the property while you're coming soon or in make ready, okay, to relieve some of those concerns. Any questions on that? So listing content, it talks about definitions and that they're agreeing to some of this content in there. I wouldn't go verbatim. You are not a lawyer to ask them to read that section. Again, remind them if they have any questions, especially in property management, about what this means or why it's written the way it is, they're more than welcome to speak to a lawyer before they sign anything, okay? I don't want you answering questions that you're just kind of throwing spaghetti at a wall and hoping that you're right. Just don't do it. It's best, have them talk to a lawyer if they have questions.
And that's on what?
On any of this, I would have them. But when it comes to listing content, it talks about, and it really talks about, like, number 3, it talks about that the listing content is exclusively owned by us. The landlord has no right. So basically, they can't make you give them your photos if you paid for them. They can't make you give them the MLS information so they could relist it themselves with that because it's owned by us, the broker. So that's one of those. But I don't want you going into super details about definitions or anything, because then if you tell them it wrong and they've recorded it or written it down or misunderstood it or misheard you or took the wrong tone, whatever, then, I mean, they can sue for anything, but they definitely will if you misrepresent what's actually in here. Okay, so I just tell them if you have any questions about content or you have any questions about access, just go ahead and talk to a lawyer if you have read this and you're still confused. So 7, authorizing access. This is talking to them about the fact that they're authorizing people to access the property. They can't expect to lease their house if they're not going to be allowed to show it. It talks about scheduling companies. So a lot of times in Temple Belton, Fort Hood, they have showing time. I think you can piecemeal an actress now if you can sometimes use CSS, or if you're using showing time up north, I think with actress you can also use showing time. It just depends. So if you're using a scheduling company, you'll need to disclose that here. And it talks about 7C, it talks about the key box. So 7C is really important because you need to know if you can place a lockbox on the property. So if you place a lockbox on the property, you need permission to do so. And it says broker is or is not authorized to place this on the property. If tenant occupies the property at any time, landlord will furnish broker a written statement. For instance, there is something here. I have it in your documents I printed for you. And some of you may have even pulled this up by accident when you're practicing or you're doing a listing. Key box authorization by tenant. This is what you need to have filled out before you put a lockbox on that property if it's occupied. Okay? And it just says here the property located at blank, whatever the lease listing is at. The owner of the above referenced property has listed the property for sale with Keller Williams Realty. The owner has authorized the broker to place the key box. The undersigned tenant authorizes broker to place the key box on the property, and then they sign and agree.
What if they don't agree to sign it?
Well, that's between them and the broker. Or, I'm sorry, them and the landlord. Yes. Yes, because I'm sure their lease states something about it, and that will come up for sure, but I would just state to them if the person comes to you and says, I don't know what to do, my tenant won't, well, then they need to make a determination and possibly talk to a lawyer at that time.
This would be a phrase in there about them actually allowing people to see the property.
Well, that's also in their lease. So, yeah. And that's where this gets gray, guys, because your landlord will sometime call you and be like, well, I'm not sure, especially if there's not a property management, they'll be like, I don't know what to do, and yada, yada, yada. It's gray. So just be careful about how you answer, because you don't want to be taken as managing the property or giving them legal advice. Okay? So next is cooperation with other brokers, and this is where we're going to talk about what we pay to the broker that's bringing a tenant. So you have 8A, that's if they're in the MLS, obviously. You just fill that out, what percentage they're going to give based on what originally you guys had discussed. And then, of course, non-MLS brokers. And typically, I just do the same. I mean, whether they are or not in the MLS, I typically will pay them. I just will make sure I have a broker-to-broker agreement if they're not in the MLS, so they can have proof that I'd be willing to pay them. But not all brokers or agents are the same. So make sure that if you are taking somebody to a lease and you don't have access to the MLS, that it is either in or it's not in MLS, then you have a broker-to-broker or broker-to-owner agreement. Okay?
And I noticed in showing lease properties the last couple weeks in Killeen, Dalton, Temple, Parker Heights, Cove area, mostly closer to the Fort Hood. Where here you see 25 to 50% on leases up there, I saw 1%, 8%.
Yeah.
Crazy.
$100.
$100, yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's a lot of properties up there that are not even in the MLS that they want you to come and deposit, that you don't get paid on if you show them, so. It's
Yeah.
But, you know, in your client's best interest, you gotta show them.
Yeah. It is a challenge, and you have to remember going into this that the hope is that you're going to nurture this relationship so that over time they become a buyer. But yes, in fact, it's just recently that Temple Belton and up north that they actually have been putting a lot of leases on the MLS. Before, it was really hard to find leases. It wasn't as available. Most people didn't put them on the MLS. So.
They're there now, they just don't pay them.
Yep. Well, hopefully we can, just work on behalf of our clients, and times will change maybe, but that's the beauty of negotiation though too. And you have a broker to broker form, so if you're unhappy with something, you can always negotiate that up front. There's nothing wrong with negotiating something, so whether it's for your client or on your behalf. I always let my client know that I'm going to do that just in case it's like eager and this is the only option for them. It's fine. If I don't get paid, I don't get paid, but it doesn't hurt to have that conversation and say, do you mind if I negotiate this, because this is where they're at and this is where I was hoping they'd be, so I'm going to negotiate that. So you can definitely do that. Okay, any questions on cooperation and how to fill that out? That's what you're going to be paying. If you're listing the lease, that's what you're willing to pay the tenant's agent.
What's typical in Austin right now for a run?
It's all negotiable.
Yeah.
I wish I could tell you. It ranges. It ranges. Yeah. It's all negotiable. That's all I can say.
Is the tenant's agent?
Yeah. No, the leasing,
Oh, the lease.
the listing agent.
Yeah. Well, and here's the thing. I mean, It literally can be a number of things, but typically it's a percentage of 1 month's rent. So I think it depends on how many times you've listed a lease for them. If you're listing consistently with them, they may pay you a little less because you're doing more work and you're making more money over time with them. If it's your first and only time listing, you may make a little more. It all depends on how you negotiate it truly. I mean, it'd be hard to say that there's an average because every single person does it differently. So some people even just do like a flat fee. Okay, number 9, intermediary status. Again, do not pre-check this for your sellers or your landlords. Don't say, oh, they'll be intermediary and they don't want to be. Yes.
Before we move on to that,
Yeah.
can I just throw an example here?
Yeah.
So if, say, you want to be competitive in this market, so you want to offer the tenant's representative at least 30%, and you want to make some money, then in that first box that was, I don't think I did this right before, but in the box that was the compensation box, I can't find it. You put, say if you wanted 70% and you were paying 30% to the other agent, would you put 100% of 1 month's lease in that first box and then down in the?
That's what that would look like, yes, if that's how you wanted to do
That's
it.
what- that's-
Yeah, so that first box needs to be the entire amount. And then out of that entire amount, how much are you going to pay the buyer's agent, which would leave you with whatever's left. So yeah, make sure to do that right, because if you only put in whatever percentage and you're paying that to the buyer's agent, then you get 0.
So what if you do a flat fee? How does that look in that?
So then you would you would check 3 and do whatever that flat fee is, and then in MLS it would say if the other broker represents the tenant, complete only one, either a percentage of 1 month's rent to be paid under the lease, a percentage of all rents, or blank. So you can either choose to pay them a flat fee, or you could still choose to pay them a percentage of 1 month's rent. You would just know that's coming out of your flat fee. Yeah.
That's what I wanted to clarify.
Yes. Good question. Yeah, that's a great way to clarify.
Sorry.
So, yeah, so we're talking about first number 5, paragraph 5A. Paragraph 5A is what she's talking about, like, where do you put the full amount? Because typically what happens is the landlord tells you, I'm going to, or you guys negotiate, you're going to get paid this sum. And then you go to paragraph 8, A and B, and you say, out of that sum that the landlord is going to pay me, now I'm going to take out of the money that I'm going to make, and I'm going to pay the tenant's agent or the seller's agent this much money. That's how that works. Because the commission agreement is between you and the landlord, and then the other agreement, yes, you still are saying you're going to pay that amount, but sometimes they'll try to negotiate or whatever. That's between you and the landlord. They can't come in and say, they can, but that's why you have to do a broker to broker, because you're, in essence, you're changing this as well. Okay? That muddy as heck. Sorry, guys. All right.
So let's just say we're gonna get 100% of their month's rent. That goes straight to Keller Williams, right? Yes.
Well, in essence, yes. We'll say yes. It depends, but yes.
Is a lease different, is it charged different than if you do?
No.
selling a home? So still you're gonna, okay.
Yeah, so still, yes, you still pay a cut of whatever you make, whether it's lease or sell, to your split.
Okay.
But if you're capped, then, yeah, it goes to you. Yeah, so that's why I say it's depend. I know it's kind of gray, but it depends. But yes, to clarify, whatever you get paid, whatever that commission looks like, whether it's $100 or $1 million, you still have to pay your split until you're capped. Yes. Okay. Okay, so number 9, moving on to intermediary status. It's really important that you don't check that for your client. You ask ahead of time, will you give me permission, or will you give the deal permission to work through an intermediary, and you can explain that to them. You may have already done that with your IABS, but you may have to do it again. And so then you check the appropriate box that they ask you to check. I see a lot of people that just check it and assume, and then later on they get in the middle of a deal and the person says, well, I didn't agree to that. So make sure you're asking before you do that. Okay, next page, 10, confidential information. Again, it's just stating that you are fiduciary to your client, whether that's the tenant or the seller. In this case, it's the seller. And so you hold their information confidential unless they give you permission to negotiate with whatever information, and you want that in writing. 11, broker's authority. This is just saying that you can or cannot list this on the MLS or on the internet. So, I'm sorry, not just on the internet. So it says you don't want the listing or the address on the internet. Now, obviously, if you're going to post it on MLS, you need to let them know this will be syndicated to hundreds of websites. So just know that this will be happening, right? And if not, then it probably needs to be on that notice to exclude the listing. Okay. Here I go again with this thing. Okay, make ready. It talks about paragraph 11D, make ready. Number 1, it says broker may not arrange for contractors to make repairs or alterations to the property. Number 2 says broker may arrange for contractors to make repairs or alterations to the property. The total cost of repairs or alterations may not exceed blank unless the landlord consents to any excess. Unless this agreement limits the broker's discretion, otherwise broker will use the broker's best judgment in selecting contractors and determining the repairs and alterations will be made. The landlord will A, pay the contractors directly and pay broker a service fee of blank upon receipt of the contractors and broker's invoices, or B, reimburse broker for the costs broker incurs for new repairs, alterations, and pay the broker for a service fee of blank upon receipt. Now, don't do that. Just don't do it. Just be like, hey, you know what? If you want the lawn mowed, call your lawnmower and Venmo him or her. Venmo is great. What you don't want is them Venmoing you because you are commingling funds. This happens a lot, and I see this a lot in when I sit on ethics hearings. A lot of what I see is people commingling funds for property management, or even with a seller saying, hey, do you mind doing this? I'll cut you a check later. It's commingling funds if you're paying for it, and then they're giving you money and all of this. Typically, if this happens, you have to have a separate account, and it needs to really be approved by Avis. So what I suggest in all of this is you check A, okay? Unless you're well versed in this, you check A, and you have the landlord handle stuff themselves. I'm sorry. Yes, D1. Yeah, I'm so used to AB. Okay, yes, D1. Check D1 unless you, of course, get permission and then you have Scott's blessing or Avis's blessing on making the other part happen. But you can find yourself in a whole bunch of trouble commingling funds this way. It's really easy to do because all it takes is you paying someone and then you taking a check from the landlord and you putting that check in your bank account. You have now commingled funds. And it's just best not to do that because it needs to be separate. Their funds need to go from their bank account to whoever they're going to, not through your bank account ever. Okay, so if they're going to wire you money into your account so you can go get a water heater fixed, no ma'am, no sir, don't do it. Okay, that's commingling funds. You just say, hey, you know what? Here are 3 people that I recommend that can fix a water heater. I'm sure they can figure out how to take your payment over the phone. It's fine. Or you can overnight them a check. Any questions on that? Okay. All right, I know I'm making it hard for you, but I just want you guys to be safe. So, in the end, it's making it easier, I promise. Okay, so the next one is landlord's representations. You're going to go through and ask all these questions. Don't assume. On F, it says landlord is not aware of any liens on the or other encumbrances against the property. Ask that. Don't just say none or no. If they say no or none, fill that in. None or no. Don't leave it blank. Okay? Because then I know when I'm reviewing it that you've asked. Because if I sing it blank, I'm assuming you haven't asked. So I'm going to send you back to re-ask that question. E, landlord is current and not delinquent on all loans or other financial obligations. Yes or no? And then there are no optional user fees for the to use common areas, for example, pool or tennis courts, except for blank. So like in Wells Branch, they have a voluntary HOA. So who's paying that? What does that look like? You need to have that disclosed here. And then the landlord is not aware of a condition concerning the property that materially affects the health or safety of an ordinary tenant except, and if that's like it's got lead paint or asbestos or whatever, that would go there. Okay?
On a voluntary HOA. say nobody pays it, what happens? Like, since it's voluntary.
Nothing. But the landlord may say it's voluntary, but I'm requiring that the tenant does this. And if that's the case, we need to know. So that way we could properly address it with the tenant so there's not any unset expectations and all of a sudden they get a bill. Okay, next page. Y'all are doing great. Are we all doing okay? This is so exciting. All right, talks about limitation of liability. Of course, what we are or are not responsible or liable for. And it just talks about, really important things like freezing water pipes, a dangerous property condition. Make sure they understand that. Now, that doesn't mean if it's lower than freezing, or if freezing or lower, that you're not going to possibly go buy a cover and put it on there, right? Because that's kind of a customer service thing. But I mean, you don't have to. It is nice. If there's a big storm, Avis will typically send out a notification, hey, go check your listings, especially if they're vacant, because you want to make sure there's not a huge leak somewhere, okay? So that way you can catch it quickly. Default mediation attorney's fees, again, in the state of Texas, bless you. It's a hug it out state, so you have the opportunity to hug it out, go through mediation, shake hands, make everything okay. If not, then obviously the contract states what happens next. That's right. So the next is lease requirements by a landlord. I'm not keeping up, sorry. Okay, number 20, lease requirements by landlord. So this is really important for you to put stuff on the MLS. And of course, I didn't pre-fill this out because it is so different for everybody. But you're gonna ask them these questions one by one. The monthly rent, when do you want it to be due? Now, if they're using a property management company, they may be able to send you the template that they're going to use. And you fill these in and get the landlord to agree to that because that's whatever's on their property management agreement, okay? But you need to know what to put on the MLS because if you do it wrong, it's coming out of your pocket, okay? So when is the rent due? First day or blank. Late charges, at what point on what day, or so at 11:59 on what day is rent after the date in which is rent due. Initial late charges, what? Is it a dollar amount? Is it a percentage of 1 month's rent? Is there additional charge per day? Okay, so you're gonna have to ask these questions. Pets, are they permitted? They are, but what is the following restriction? So I'll only allow dogs 10 pounds or less that don't bark. That's a cat, just saying. And not all cats either, because some are more than that. If a pet is permitted, what does that look like? So you're asking them that question. And make sure you're not missing any of these boxes. Double, triple, quadruple check yourself on this, because there's a lot of little things here. What's the security deposit? All utilities to be paid by the tenant except for what? How many days can guests stay on the property? You may even need to look into the HOA rules because the landlord may not even know what the HOA states. And you're going to want to make sure that they're leasing in the requirements that the HOA requires because sometimes you can't even have roommates in an HOA. Okay? So make sure you know those things. How many vehicles can be permitted on the property? You may also want to know where they can park. Sometimes they can't park on the street. Sometimes they can't park where they're crossing over a sidewalk. You'll get a fine for that. So make sure you know those things. What's a trip charge? That may or may not, if it's by a property management company, they'll tell you what that is. If it's an owner, they'll tell you. Key box is authorized during how many days at the end of the lease? What's the fee if they want it removed? The inventory condition form to be delivered in how many days? Yard, how is that maintained? Pool and spa, repairs. Shouldn't be anything in special provisions. If there is, you want to get it approved by Scott or Avis or Mary or myself. Assignment, subletting, and replacing tenant fees. You'll want to know those things, okay? And again, some of these things, because you may not even be writing the lease up. It may be done by the owner or by the property manager, but it's good to know these things so you can fill it out correctly on the MLS.
Can you explain that last one? Oh,
Subletting?
yeah. So does that have to be filled in?
No, they may say they don't allow it.
Okay.
If procured by tenant, how much is the fee? If procured by landlord, how much is the fee? They may say it's just not allowed at all.
Okay. If that's the case, then do you just leave that portion blank, or?
If you're the one writing the lease, they really need to talk to a lawyer before you do anything with that. Or
Say
they're.
that again.
If they're deciding to not allow subletting and it's not in the lease like that, if you're going to write the lease for them, because this is just a lease listing. Remember, we're not writing a lease. This is just to list it. So if they're going to say, I don't want to sublet the property, if the person breaks their lease, they break their lease and they can't sublet it and there's just nothing that they can do about it, then you're writing the lease, then you'll either want to see that verbiage in there, and if it's not, then it needs to be put in there by a lawyer or by the landlord themselves, and you need it in writing. And I would still advise them to talk to a lawyer as to how that might affect them. Does that make sense?
By not allowing it?
By not allowing it, right.
If the owner doesn't allow
Sublease.
letting, then you need something written from the owner or his attorney?
Yes,
Okay,
exactly.
okay.
Yes. Because you want to know how to disclose that, and if it comes from them or an attorney, that you're not making it up, right? You're not the one putting it out there. They are. Okay. Agreement of parties, again, very similar to what you're going to see in a listing agreement. Additional notices talks about compensation, again, fair housing laws. It talks about the broker advises the landlord to review the MLS to make sure it's filled out appropriately, so they can't say later, well, you put it was a 3-bed and it's a 4-bed, whatever. Okay. Again, broker advises the landlord to consult an attorney before using any type of surveillance. Man, that was interesting in DC. They were talking about rules and surveillance and MLS and how you need to disclose. So you need to ask the landlord, hey, do you have any surveillance on the property so we can disclose that?
Now, where are you?
I'm on E.
22E.
Yes, ma'am, 22E. This is just talking about consult an attorney before using any type of surveillance to record or monitor prospective tenants without their knowledge. It's important. It doesn't mean that they do, because in the state of Texas, I think you have to have one party that agrees, but I would still talk to a lawyer. Talk to a lawyer, because if they're going to go later and start refusing tenants because of what they see on a surveillance camera, they're still going to have to come up with a why. So, statutes or ordinances may regulate certain items on the property. It says like swimming pools or septic systems, so make sure they understand that. Residential service contracts, it talks about if they want to get one. Of course, they want to make sure, confirm what that looks like with the tenant in the property. It talks about property code. It's really good. I have to look up, I think it's at TAMU. There is a landlord-tenant guide. There's nothing wrong with making sure that both your landlord and your tenant have a copy of that so they can read what the state regulates in regards to being a landlord or being a tenant.
Is that in .loop?
I will look. I don't know if it's in .loop. It may be now. I can look for you in just a minute. Talks about 1978, so the possibility for lead. The broker advises landlord to refrain from transmitting personal information such as bank accounts, so don't have them email you any of that. If they're emailing leases back and forth, the social security number should be blacked out on that because you don't want to see any of that. If you have a lease that's put into the MLS, you're also going to want to have that social security number removed off of, or not MLS, I'm sorry, the .loop. If you're going to put stuff in .loop, because it can't be deleted, it can only be archived. And so if you have something with a social security number in there, I would go in and darken that out if you can. And then broker cannot give legal advice. Read this listing carefully. If you do not understand, consult an attorney. Okay, next page, we've already talked about broker authorization for a key box. So we're going to skip over that, key box authorization. The next one is wire fraud warning. Again, you're going to get this signed by everyone because even people who are landlords or tenants can be scammed. So make sure you're getting that signed.
So for brokers printed name, you want us to use Avis or you want us to use Keller Williams?
Keller Williams Realty is your brokerage. Yes, ma'am. Yep. Okay, seller's authorization to release and advertise certain information. This form basically states that the seller or the landlord is giving you permission to market their property a certain way. So for instance, if they say, tell them that they can get 1 month's free rent, or the washer and dryer are going to stay with the property, this is what you want it on. You want it on this. Because if you market it that the refrigerator and the washer and dryer are coming with the property, and then the landlord all of a sudden, says, forget it, I don't want to give it, then, you have in writing, that's why it was on MLS, and if it's already been leased, then those things stay with the property. And you at least have covered yourself to say, remember, you signed this form that said that I could advertise it with those on there. So you're going to have to provide it, whether they're the ones already in the property or you buy others. They need to be. Okay? Any questions on this form? This is just, again, more documentation saying that the seller is giving you permission to release certain information. I'm not going to go through this entire lease application. If you've taken Greg's class, I think he goes through it pretty well. Most importantly, you will not be filling this out, right? They should be filling this out. And most of the time, especially nowadays, they're filling it out online. So that's even better. Couple things that you will want to know is they're going to need to know how to fill out information on who is helping them with the property, which I think is up here, right? Right here, applicant was referred to landlord by a real estate agent, newspaper sign, blah, blah, blah. If it's you want to advise them, I'm your realtor, my name needs to go there, here's my phone number. Okay, or you can even say, you can put Kristen Wood, Keller Williams Realty, and my phone number. So that's an advisement you want to remind them of, because when they're doing it online at midnight, they may not see that, or they may just jump over it because they're like, oh, my realtor talked to them, they know. Make sure you tell them this is where my information goes so I can negotiate for you. And then obviously I tell them fill this out like to the best of their ability, every single thing. And it may take them extra work. They may have to go find previous employer information, so don't expect it's going to take 2 minutes. And then the last piece of this that they may be unsure of is, where's it at? Right here, fees. They may submit a non-refundable fee of blank or blank. You can give them a copy of the customer portion of the MLS to know how to fill that out if they're filling this out online. Because again, most of the time you're not going to be on the phone with them while they're filling this out. They just go and fill it out and you get a notification that they've done it. Okay, so if they need this information, most of them aren't going to know this off the top of their head. So giving them a copy and highlighting the part where they'll need this and just say, hey, keep this form, you're going to need this when you fill out the application, so they know how to fill this out if it's not already pre-done, and sometimes depending on the company it may be pre-done. Any questions on that? Yes?
I know a lot of people are a bit wary about giving out the social security
Mm-hmm.
number. What is, I should probably know this, but what's the point? I mean, why do people require that?
I think it's just an identification, a way to identify them, and if they're, yeah, well, that too, background check. And a lot of times, that's why a lot of people have gone on to online portals now, so you can do it securely instead of having to fill it out on a piece of paper, and then your realtor has it, and your realtor leaves it on the copier, and now everybody in the office has it, right? So safety is key, and doing it online is the best course of action. If it's not required, then it's really best to hand deliver it wherever it's going to go if it has those numbers. The other thing I advise is if they're working with a property management company that's doing everything through paper or email, that they leave that off and then they go in or verbalize it after they've confirmed that it is the person they're supposed to be talking to, and they give that number verbally.
Okay.
So just depends on your client, but yeah.
Yeah, some people are very,
Yeah, I don't blame them.
You have to be very careful with that too now though, because a lot of the online ones will say, well, first of all, like, if you don't complete a field, it won't let you go. And the other thing is, it says any application that's not complete will not be considered. So then you just lose your money. So,
Right. Well, and that's why you, as an agent, if you know that ahead of time, you should be negotiating for your client anyways. So most of the time, online portal, I don't have many clients complain about, but I do on paper. And so then I say, hey, my client has an issue putting their social security number on the paper. Can they just give you a call? And most of the time, I'm like, sure, that's fine. We'll go ahead and fill it out. It's still going to go on the paper. They're just not handing it to me and then handing it to them and them and them and them with it on. So, but I agree, it does need to be fully filled out. So do whatever you can up front, and that's why you ask as many questions as possible. All right. Authorization to release information related to a residential applicant. This is something that they may or may not have to fill out to give to a property manager. This may go directly to an owner. I just put it in there so you could see that it is here. If this is something that you need, it's just giving permission to whomever to release information. Kind of like the HOA disclosure or information that you would send out to the HOA saying that the seller gives permission to release the HOA information.
Where is that?
After the next page, sorry.
Next to the last page. Turn.
Should be authorization to release related. Yep,
Okay.
perfect. All right, so we're going to move on. This is an invoice. Some of you have seen this, some of you have not. I get a lot of questions about this. This is in dot-loop, and it is editable. So you'll want it to whoever this is going to. So if you are invoicing the landlord, then to would go to your landlord. And then the property address, who the tenant is, when it was leased, who you are, and then the commission structure over here. Okay? A lot of people ask it, okay, wait. If you are a tenant, then the to would be to the listing agent or to the brokerage, depending on, or the property management company if they're paying you. And then the same information would go in the bottom. Invoice, that's up to you. The invoice number to put up here, if you want to put an invoice number, it's good for tracking purposes. So what I started doing was I do invoice number 1 dash, and then I put the address. So like my home address is 211. So I'll do 1-211. Or maybe put the first Nick, right? Because it's Nick Faldo, right? 2-2129 Paradise. So I know who the invoice is for, not just through the tenant's name and the property address, but for my invoice purposes. So, or you could just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's fine too. But you get to choose your own. You're welcome. You own your own business. So, all right. Any questions on this? This has to go out to whomever is going to be paying you. Okay. It has information here about the fact that it's going to come to us directly. Okay. And then it talks about how to make the checks out. Now, if you are the tenant and possibly even the listing agent, you will have to provide the W-9, which is on the very back of your form here. You will have to provide this W-9 to whomever is going to be paying you. So if it's a brokerage or if it's a property management company, you need to provide this W-9 to them, and this is in the loop. If for some reason you are the one being, or they're the ones, you're the one being paid, no, they're the ones being paid, and you send them this, you also have to get their W-9. If we're cutting them a check, for instance, if you're the lease listing agent, and then you get paid, and then we're cutting the tenant's agent a check, we need the W-9 of the other company. There are certain companies that are not giving us their updated W-9. If that's the case, we will still pay you. We will not pay them until we get this, because the IRS requires an updated form. And I guess I heard recently we saw one from 2014, y'all. Like, wow, I'm sure. Yeah, 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 yeah. They're refusing to give us an updated one. So that's fine. We want to make sure y'all get paid. So as long as you've done your due diligence and send in the forms as you need, you'll get paid, and then they will not until they send us the appropriate form. Okay? So any questions on anything we went over? Was this valuable for you? Yes. Yes? Okay. Lease listings are really great opportunities because typically they're either going to decide to sell at some point or they're investors that are going to do more. And GDAA, there's a couple other property management companies, but I've worked with GDAA in the past. They're great at qualifying people. They give you your clients back. If they want to sell, they're not going to keep them. They'll give them to you. So if you have questions about how to work with them on qualifications, you can call over to their office. They'll send you their packets, which are phenomenal. And you can provide those to your clients as well for more info. Okay?
What was that?
AA. Awesome.
Thank you, Kristen.
You're so welcome. Have a fantastic day. For those of you who are going to be on later, I think we're going to do how to hold a high-level open house on the Zoom call today. So, and I'm about to go post the Zoom link on Facebook if you don't have it already. All right?